The throne room shook with the sound of enemy fire. The marble floor cracked under the blasts. Golden banners of the alien empire burned as smoke filled the air. The queen of the great empire stood tall on the steps of her throne, her silver crown shining in the dim light. Her guards, tall armored figures with sharp spears, circled her at first, but fear was already in their eyes. The enemy had broken the outer gates. Screams of soldiers echoed through the corridors. The queen raised her hand, demanding her warriors to hold the line. But when the doors crashed open and enemy troops stormed in, her guards looked at one another, fear overcoming loyalty. One by one they dropped their weapons, their heavy boots pounded as they ran, abandoning their ruler, leaving her exposed to the storm. The queen's heart sank. For the first time in her life she stood alone. Her voice trembled with fury as she shouted after them. But none returned. She turned to face her doom, preparing herself to die with dignity. But then, a sound, a single voice broke the chaos. It was the voice of the human, the man who was not even part of her court, the outsider, small compared to. The alien warriors mocked for his weakness. He stood at the bottom of the throne steps, blood already dripping from his lip where a stray blast had grazed him. He did not flee. Instead, he stepped forward, his body placed between the queen and the incoming storm. The enemy laughed when they saw him. A human? This is your protector? One of them sneered, raising his weapon. The first strike came fast. A blade meant for the queen's chest struck the human instead. The weapon tore across his arm. Blood sprayed across the floor. But he did not fall. He growled in pain but held his ground, blocking her with his body. The queen gasped, her eyes wide with disbelief. More blows rained down on him. His chest, his back, his shoulders, each one landing with the sound of breaking flesh. Still, he stood. His body shook with every strike, but his feet would not move. His eyes glared at the enemy with a fire they had never seen in their strongest alien warriors. Why? The queen whispered, her voice almost lost in the storm. Why are you doing this? The human spat blood. His voice was hoarse but strong. Because someone has to stand. Because you should not face death alone. Those words cut through her heart, sharper than any blade. Never in her life had anyone spoken to her like this. Not her generals, not her loyal guards, not even her closest advisors. They all served her for power, for honor, for duty. But this human, this fragile creature of flesh, stood for nothing but choice. The enemy pressed harder. Blows thundered against him. One knee buckled, but he forced himself upright. His hands shook, but he clenched his fists tighter. Every strike was meant to kill him, yet he did not fall. His blood pooled on the floor, shining under the firelight. The queen could not move. Her body froze, torn between rage at her guards and fear for this human who would die for her. She reached for her sword, but her hand trembled. The human turned his head slightly, his face twisted with pain. Stay back. Your Majesty, you must live, even if I don't. Her breath caught. Her chest tightened as she watched him take another crushing strike to his ribs. His scream echoed through the throne room. But still, he did not let them pass. His back became a shield, his body a wall. The enemies began to hesitate. Confusion flickered in their eyes. Why did a mere human fight harder than any alien warrior? Why did he refuse to break? One soldier snarled, "He is nothing, cut him down." But even as they struck again, their hands shook. The queen's vision blurred with tears she had never known she could shed. In her entire reign, no moment had felt like this. For the first time, she was not a ruler, not a queen. She was simply a woman, shielded by a man who owed her nothing. The walls shook again as more enemy troops poured into the room. The battle grew heavier. The human staggered, his breath ragged, his face pale from blood loss. Yet when the queen tried to step forward, he forced her back with one trembling hand. His voice cracked but firm. "Not yet, please, not yet." The moment stretched like eternity. The throne room burned around them, smoke and fire choking the air. And still he stood, a human, frail by alien standards, taking the blows of gods and monsters. The queen's heart thundered in her chest. She could not look away. The human's body swayed, but his will was like iron, stronger than steel, stronger than the walls that had already fallen, and as the enemy lifted their weapons for another deadly strike, the queen realized a truth that shattered her soul. One human stood when her entire empire had turned away. The throne room echoed with his defiance. His blood was the ink of a legend. His stand the birth of a story that would shake the galaxy. Asterisk, the human's body was already broken, bruises spreading like fire beneath his torn clothes. His breaths came in sharp gasps, each one dragging blood into his throat. Yet his legs refused to collapse. His arms refused to lower. He was battered but unyielding. The queen stared at him with disbelief. She was the ruler of thousands of worlds, yet she had never seen such defiance. The strongest alien warriors had sworn to protect her, yet they had fled. This human, a single outsider, was the only one who stood between her and death. The enemies pressed closer, circling like predators around wounded prey. Their weapons gleamed red in the burning light. One of them laughed, a deep, cruel sound. "Step aside, human. This fight is not yours. We want the queen, not a fragile creature like you." The human's lip curled, his voice weak but sharp. "Then you'll have to break me first." The soldiers jeered. They swung their weapons again. One strike cracked against his ribs, and he stumbled. His knees bent, his blood dripping freely. The queen gasped and took a step forward, her hand reaching for him, but before she could touch him, he pushed her back with a trembling arm. "Stay behind me," he rasped. "You must live." His words silenced her. No one had ever dared to speak to her like this. His command was not one of authority, but of sheer will. He was not her subject in this moment. He was her shield. Another strike came, cutting across his shoulder. His body lurched. His blood spattered across the marble floor. The queen felt rage ignite inside her chest, but she could not move. Her heart hammered as she watched this fragile being refuse to surrender. The attackers began to sneer, but there was unease in their eyes. Why would a human fight with such madness? Why would he endure pain that even trained alien warriors could not? One soldier spat. "You are a fool, human. She will not thank you for this. You will die forgotten." The human's mouth twisted into a bloody smile. "Better to die standing than live running." The words echoed across the throne room, louder than the clash of steel. The queen felt them pierce her like arrows. They were words of truth, words no alien lord had ever spoken. The enemies grew angrier. Their strikes became harder, faster. A blade sliced across his chest, and his blood poured down like rain. He staggered, his vision blurred, but he did not fall. His body swayed like a dying tree, yet his feet rooted to the ground. The queen's eyes burned. She had never wept in her reign, but now tears blurred her sight. She could no longer watch silently. "Enough!" she cried. Her voice thundered across the hall, shaking even the enemies, but still they advanced. The human turned his head slightly, his face pale. "Do not cry for me," he whispered. "This is what I choose." Her breath caught in her throat. She wanted to command him to stop, but the words froze. He was not obeying her. He was defying death itself. The next strike drove him to one knee. His arm shook violently. His hand pressed against the ground for balance. The queen's heart dropped. Was this the end? But then, with a roar of raw defiance, he forced himself back to his feet. His body broken, but his spirit unshaken. The enemies stared, hesitation creeping into their ranks. They had cut him again and again, yet he would not fall. He stood taller than their pride, stronger than their fear. One enemy shouted, "Why do you fight, human? She is not your queen. She is nothing to you." The human's reply was a whisper, yet it struck harder than any blade. "Because no one deserves to be left alone." The queen's breath shuddered. The words tore through her chest. She remembered the faces of her fleeing guards, their backs turned, their loyalty shattered. She remembered her own fear when she stood alone, and now this human, with no crown, no power, no reason, chose to bear her burden, her hands clenched into fists, her nails biting into her palms. For the first time in her reign, she felt shame. She was queen of an empire, yet it was a human who carried the weight of honor. The human staggered again, his blood making rivers across the floor. His arms shook, his breath shallow. Yet still he stood, his eyes locked on the enemy with unbreakable fire. The queen's voice cracked as she called out, "Please stop! You cannot take more." He turned his head, his face broken but his eyes alive. "I can take enough." The enemy drew back their blades for another strike. But this time their hands shook, doubt filled them, fear gnawed at them. They had never seen such will, never faced such defiance. The human stood swaying, the weight of flesh crushing him. His body was almost gone, but his spirit roared louder than the fires burning the hall. The queen's chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. Her eyes locked on him. She understood now. This was not just a fight. This was a message, a truth carved in blood. A single human could stand where armies failed. A single choice could outweigh 1,000 oaths. And as the enemy circled once more, blades ready to end him, the queen whispered to herself a vow she had never imagined she would speak. "If he falls, I will not run. I will stand with him." The throne room burned. The walls trembled. The human stood broken but unbowed. His body was flesh, but his will was something greater. And in that moment, he became more than a man. He became the shield of a queen, the defiance of a world, the beginning of a legend. Asterisk, the human stand did not end in silence. It ended in whispers. They carried through the palace like smoke, slipping into every chamber, every corridor, every ear. By dawn, the entire court knew the truth. The queen's guards had fled, her throne had been left bare, and a single human, an outsider mocked for his weakness, had stood where they had run. The nobles gathered in the great hall, their voices sharp as blades. Some sneered, calling the story a lie. Others lowered their eyes in shame, knowing it was true. The queen's silence was heavier than any proof, for she did not deny it. "Imagine," one noble spat, "a human holding the throne while our finest warriors fled." Another hissed, "If this tale spreads to the people, we will be the shame of the galaxy." But the tale had already spread, in the markets, in the training fields, in the far edges of the empire. They whispered of the human shield. They spoke of his blood staining the marble floors, of his body standing tall against death itself. Children repeated his words in the streets. "Better to die standing than live running." They shouted them in play, turning them into chants. The guards who had fled hid their faces in shame. Unable to meet the eyes of the common folk, the queen sat alone in her private chamber, the flames of the torches casting shadows on the walls. She had ruled with power and fear, yet now her thoughts twisted around the human's broken figure. She saw his body standing against the storm, saw his eyes blazing with fire even as blood poured from his wounds. Her hands trembled. She remembered his words, "Because no one deserves to be left alone." No general had spoken such words to her. No sworn knight had shown such courage. The weight of it pressed against her heart, a burden she could not shake. She summoned the human to her chamber. He entered slowly, his body still broken, his steps heavy with pain. Every breath rattled like broken glass in his chest, yet his head was held high, his eyes still burned. The queen studied him in silence. His clothes were torn, his arms bound with rough bandages, his back still carried fresh wounds. He had no armor, no weapon, nothing but will. "Why did you stay?" she asked quietly. Her voice was softer than she had ever spoken. Her crown sat on the table beside her, forgotten. "You had no duty to me, no reason. Why did you not run?" The human's answer was simple, his voice steady though weak. "Because I know what it means to be abandoned, and I could not let it happen to you." Her chest tightened. For a moment, the queen was not a ruler, not a monarch of worlds, but a woman staring at a truth she could not deny. He had chosen her, not out of duty, but out of something greater. In the court, the whispers grew louder. Some nobles called for his exile, claiming he was a danger to tradition. If the people believe a human is stronger than our kind, what will remain of our pride? They hissed. Others argued that he should be honored, raised as a symbol of loyalty. He is proof that courage is not born of blood, but of heart, they said. The court fractured, alliances broke, rage and shame filled the air like fire. Guards who had abandoned their queen tried to defend themselves, saying they had been ordered to retreat, but no one believed them. The image of the lone human standing unbroken was carved into every mind. The queen's silence became its own weapon. She refused to condemn him, refused to cast him out, and, with every day that passed, her refusal became an unspoken declaration. The human was no longer a shadow at the edge of the throne. He was the storm at its center, yet danger brewed in the silence. The nobles whispered of betrayal, of plots to erase the human before his story grew too large. Their pride was wounded, their honor crushed, and they would not suffer the shame of bowing before a human. The queen knew this. She could feel their hatred dripping like poison in the air. She watched her court with sharp eyes, but her trust in them had already broken. She trusted only one now, the one who had taken the blows for her. That night, as the palace lights dimmed and the city below fell silent, the queen walked alone to the balcony. The stars stretched endless above her. Her people looked to her for strength, yet her strength was borrowed from a human who should have been dust. Behind her, she heard his steps, slow but steady. She did not turn at first. She spoke to the night instead. They whisper of you. They call you savior, they call you curse, and they call me weak for letting you stand by me, the humans. Voice came like gravel, worn but steady. Let them whisper. Words do not matter, choices do. Her hands gripped the balcony rail, her chest a storm. She wanted to argue, but her words caught in her throat, because he was right. He had proven it with blood. The queen finally turned. Her eyes locked on his. In them she saw no hunger for power, no desire for crown or wealth, only fire, only truth. And in that moment, she knew. The whispers in the court were nothing compared to the roar that was coming. A legend had been born, and legends did not fade. They grew, they consumed. The queen stood taller, her eyes burning with the same fire she saw in his. If the court plotted against him, they would find her standing in the way. If the nobles feared his courage, they would learn that courage had already infected her. For the first time she smiled, not as a ruler, but as a woman who had found something stronger than armies, stronger than crowns. And as the night wind swept through the balcony, she whispered words meant only for herself. He stood when they fled, he bled where they hid, and for that, he is mine to protect. The whispers in the court continued, but now, so did the heartbeat of something far greater. A bond forged, not by blood, not by duty, but by choice. The palace was no longer a place of safety. The whispers of betrayal had turned into silent footsteps in the corridors, shadows moving where no one should be. The queen felt the weight of eyes on her at every turn. Yet she knew those eyes did not watch her alone. They watched the human. He walked the halls slowly, his wounds still raw, but his presence burned brighter than any torch. Servants bowed to him with trembling hands. Soldiers turned away in shame. Children whispered his name with awe. The nobles hated it. They had lost their pride. And they would not forgive the man who had exposed their weakness. One evening, the queen summoned him to her private chamber. The walls glowed with soft silver light. Her crown rested on the table beside her. She did not sit on her throne, but stood facing him, equal in the quiet. You could have left, she said, her voice soft, her hands clenched behind her back. You could have returned to your people. No one would have blamed you. No one would have remembered you here. The human's eyes, though tired, burned steady. I do not fight for crowns or memory, he answered. I fight because I know what it means to be left behind, and I will not let it happen to you. Her breath caught. She wanted to look away, But she could not. His scars told stories deeper than words. His body was marked by battles, not for glory, but for survival. She saw in him a reflection she had never allowed herself to admit: loneliness. "You speak of abandonment," she said slowly. "Who left you?" He was silent at first, his jaw clenched, his eyes darkened with pain not born of wounds. "Everyone," he whispered finally. "My people called me weak, your people called me lesser. And so I learned to stand alone." He lifted his gaze to hers. "Until you." The queen felt her chest twist. Her entire life she had been surrounded by warriors, nobles, advisors, yet in truth she too had always stood alone. Her crown had been a cage, her throne a prison. And now a human had seen through it all, but their bond, as it grew, became a threat. The court could not allow it. The nobles gathered in secret, their voices venom. "If this continues, he will become her strength, and we will become her shadow." One spat, another hissed. "He is not of our kind, he cannot be allowed to remain." That night, when the queen slept, shadows crept into the halls. Assassins cloaked in silence moved with deadly grace. Their blades glimmered faintly, their eyes filled with hate. They did not strike at the queen. No, their target was the human, the symbol of their shame. The human lay restless, pain keeping him awake. He felt the shift in the air before he saw them. The soft scrape of boots, the whisper of steel, his hand clenched. No weapon near, only his will. When the first blade struck, he rolled aside, pain flaring through his ribs. He seized the assassin's arm. Forcing the blade into the ground, another shadow lunged. His fist swung wild, raw and brutal, cracking bone with sheer desperation. The fight was savage, not elegant. He was no trained knight. He fought with broken strength, with scars and stubbornness. The room filled with grunts, steel, and blood. The assassins cursed as one by one they fell, but not without leaving wounds on him. His shoulders split open, his side torn, yet he did not fall. The queen awoke to the sound of struggle. She rushed from her chamber, her royal blade in hand. When she reached his quarters, she froze. The human stood bleeding in the center, 3 bodies of assassins at his feet, his chest heaving, his face pale, but his eyes blazing. Her heart shattered, not with fear, but with rage. Rage at her own court, at her own people, who had dared to kill the only one who had not fled. Her voice shook the walls. "Who sent them?" She roared, her fury echoing through the halls. Guards stumbled in, faces pale, none daring to speak. She turned to the human. Her hands trembled as she touched his arm, blood covering her fingers. "Why do you not rest? Why do you not yield?" He smiled weakly, blood at his lips. "Because standing is all I know." The queen's fury grew into resolve. In front of the court the next day, she rose from her throne with fire in her eyes. Her crown gleamed, her voice thundered. "You call yourselves my protectors, yet you fled. You call yourselves my nobles, yet you plot in shadows. And this human fought where you did not. This human bled where you hid." The hall fell silent, shame choking the air. The queen raised her hand, pointing to the battered human who stood swaying but unbowed beside her. "From this day forth, he is no outsider. He is the protector of the throne." Gasps echoed through the chamber. Nobles whispered in fury. Guards shifted in disbelief. But the people beyond the walls cheered when the words reached them. For they had already named him. They had already begun to believe in him. The human bowed his head, not for power, not for pride, but in quiet acceptance. The queen met his eyes, her heart steady. In that moment, she knew. The bond they shared was not weakness, it was strength. And it was about to be tested beyond anything they could imagine. The palace grew quiet after the queen's fiery declaration. Yet that silence was not peace. It was the silence of knives waiting in the dark, the silence of hatred breathing in hidden corners. The nobles did not forgive. The guards who fled did not forget, and in their bitterness, they sharpened their blades against the human. By day, the queen stood beside him in the court, bold and unyielding, She named him protector of the throne, her voice echoing across the galaxy. But by night, shadows crawled through the palace halls, carrying whispers and death. The human knew it. He felt the weight of eyes. He felt the breath of danger. His body was still broken, his wounds slow to heal, but his spirit refused to rest. He walked the corridors with fists clenched, every step a challenge to those who stalked him. The assassins struck again, this time in greater number. They came like smoke, silent, swift, their blades glimmering with venom. They did not announce themselves. They did not shout. They sought to erase him before dawn, to make his courage vanish like a dream. But the human was no dream. He was steel wrapped in blood and bone. The first assassin lunged from the shadows, a curved blade slicing toward his throat. The human ducked low, pain flaring in his ribs. His hand seized the attacker's wrist, twisting until the blade clattered to the floor. With a roar, he slammed the assassin into the wall, bones cracking like brittle wood. More came, their blades slashing, their strikes fast. The human fought with no elegance, only raw fury. His fists split lips. His elbows broke jaws. His head slammed into helmets. His knuckles tore open. Blood splattered across the marble floor, both his and theirs. The queen awoke to the chaos, her blade already in hand. She ran barefoot through the palace halls, her heart thundered with rage and fear. When she reached the chamber, the scene froze her in place. The human stood in the center, his body broken yet burning. 3 assassins already lay dead at his feet. 2 more pressed him hard. Their blades sliced across his arms and chest. His blood poured freely, yet his eyes were alive. The queen cried out, her voice sharp as steel, "Enough!" The assassins turned, but before they could strike at her, the human surged forward. His fist caught one across the jaw, sending teeth scattering across the floor. He seized the other by the throat, slamming him down until the marble cracked. Beneath the body, the chamber was silent except for his ragged breaths. His body swayed, blood dripping in rivers. The queen rushed to him, her hands shaking as she gripped his arms. "Why do you always bleed for me?" she whispered. His smile was faint, broken, but his words were clear. "Because standing for you is worth the pain." Her heart ached, for the first time in her reign. Tears fell freely down her face. She did not care who saw. She did not care what the court would say. She clutched him as though he were not her protector, but her lifeline. The next morning, the court gathered, fury and shame clashing in their whispers. The queen entered not as a ruler alone, but with the human at her side. His body wrapped in fresh bandages, his steps heavy, yet his presence unshakable. She raised her voice, sharp as fire. "You hide behind shadows, you send assassins into the night. You dare to strike at the one who stood when you ran, do you not see? Every blade you send only makes him stronger. Every wound only makes his legend greater." The nobles shifted uneasily. Some lowered their heads, shamed by her words. Others clenched their fists, unwilling to bow to a human. The court was divided. But the people beyond the palace were not. In the markets, in the streets, in the farthest villages, stories spread like wildfire. The people cheered for the protector of the throne. They painted his image on walls. They spoke of him as if he were more than a man, as if he were a force sent to remind them what courage meant. The queen stood tall before her court. She lifted her blade high, her crown shining in the light. "If you dare to raise your hand against him again, you raise your hand against me," she declared. The words shook the chamber. Her voice echoed through every hall. For the first time, she had chosen not her bloodline, not her nobles, but a single human. The human bowed his head slightly, not in submission, but in quiet respect. His voice was low but steady. "I did not ask for this, Your Majesty. I only stood because no one else would." The queen's eyes softened. Her voice dropped so only he could hear. "And that is why you are more than any of them." The court erupted with whispers, rage, and disbelief, but the queen did not waver. She had taken her stand, and she would not step back that night. When the palace lay in uneasy silence once more, the human sat alone by the balcony, his gaze fixed on the stars. His body was broken, his soul weary. Yet he felt the weight of something greater pressing on his shoulders. He was no longer just a man. He was becoming a symbol, and symbols, he knew, drew blood in the shadows. But as the cold wind brushed across his face, he smiled faintly, because he was ready for every strike, every wound, every shadow, for he had already chosen. He would bleed for her, again and again, until no shadows remained. The palace could not rest. The assassins had failed. But the greater storm still gathered outside the walls. Enemy banners burned across the horizon, their armies massing for the final assault. The air itself felt heavy with the weight of war. The queen summoned her generals, the greatest warriors of her empire, to the war council. They entered the chamber clad in polished armor, their eyes sharp, their voices cold. Around the round table maps of the galaxy lay stretched, lines of battle, drawn in blood and ink. Yet when the humans stepped into the chamber beside the queen, the air shifted. Some generals sneered openly. Others looked away, their pride unable to bear his presence. Still, none could deny the whispers beyond the walls. The people spoke his name louder than theirs. The queen raised her hand for silence. Her voice rang steady. Our enemy gathers at the gates. They come not only for our lands, but for our shame. They know my guards abandoned me. They know one human stood where others fled. They believe we are broken. The general shifted uncomfortably. The truth hung in the chamber like a blade. The queen turned to the human. "Speak," she commanded. Her words were not request but decree. The generals muttered, "He is no strategist, he is no noble." But the queen silenced them with a single glare. The human stepped forward, his body still broken, his movements slow, but his eyes burned bright. He studied the map with steady focus. His voice came low, but every word carried weight. "You speak of armies and numbers," he said. "But numbers mean nothing if the hearts of soldiers are weak. Your men saw their queen abandoned. They saw their leaders run. And now they believe courage is lost." The general stiffened, their jaws tight with anger. But he continued without fear. "You will not win this war with pride. You will not win with bloodlines or ranks. You will win only if your soldiers remember what loyalty feels like. You must remind them that standing is worth more than survival." The chamber fell silent. His words cut deeper than strategy. They struck the core of truth. One general slammed his fist on the table. "You speak like a poet, not a warrior. What do you know of leading armies?" The human lifted his bandaged hands, trembling but strong. "I know what it is to bleed where others will not. I know what it is to stand when standing means death. And if your soldiers see me stand, they will stand too." The queen's eyes glimmered, her lips curved in the faintest smile. She saw the effect his words had even on the most hardened warriors. Their anger masked something else: respect they did not wish to admit. Another general, older and wiser, leaned forward, his voice softer. "What do you suggest, human?" The human pointed at the map. His finger traced not the strongest points, but the weakest. "Place me where the line will break," he said. "Let them see me there. Let them see that a single man will not fall, and they will follow, not because they are ordered, but because they believe." Gasps rippled across the chamber. Some generals scoffed. "Suicidal," one hissed. Another growled, "Madness." But the queen's gaze did not waver. She placed her hand upon the table, her voice sharp. "It is not madness, it is truth. He has already stood where you did not. He has already bled for what you would not. And if the soldiers will follow anyone, it will not be you, it will be him." Her words silenced them all. The generals bowed their heads slowly, one by one, not to her, but to the human who stood with torn clothes and broken flesh. In that moment, pride bent before courage. The council ended with orders given. Armies would march, defenses would rise, but the greatest weapon was not steel or fire. It was the will of a single man that night. As the soldiers gathered in the Courtyard, the queen stood upon the balcony. Her voice carried over the crowd. You know who I am your queen. But today, I do not stand alone. Today, I stand with the protector of the throne. The human stepped forward into the torchlight. His bandages stained, his body scarred. His presence shook the air. The soldiers erupted into cheers, their voices thundering. For in him they saw not weakness, but defiance, not flesh, but iron will. The queen's heart swelled as she watched the fire of belief spread through her people. She turned to the human, her voice low enough for only him. You have given them what I could not. You have given them hope. He met her eyes, his voice quiet but steady. Hope is all we need. The rest we will earn. The drums of war thundered through the night. The enemy gathered beyond the horizon. The empire's fate hung by a thread. But for the first time, the queen did not fear, for at her side stood not an army, not a general, but a human whose spirit was stronger than all, and in the silence of her heart, she whispered a truth she dared not speak aloud. If he falls, I fall with him. Asterisk. The night before the final battle was heavy with silence. The stars above the palace burned like cold fire, and every soldier felt the weight of what was coming. The enemy's drums echoed faintly across the horizon. Each beat a promise of blood. The human stood alone in the courtyard. His bandages fresh but already soaked through. His hands trembled with pain, yet his eyes burned like the flames of 1,000 torches. He knew tomorrow was not just war, it was a reckoning. The queen joined him, her royal cloak brushing against the stone floor. She did not wear her crown, she wore armor instead, silver plates forged for battle. Her sword rested at her side, gleaming beneath the moonlight. She looked at him not as a ruler but as an equal. You should not fight tomorrow. She whispered, your body is broken. You cannot carry this weight alone. He turned to her, his voice low but steady. I am broken, yes, but I will stand until my legs refuse me, because if I do not, they will not believe, and without belief, we have already lost. Her chest tightened. She wanted to forbid him, to order him to stay behind, but she knew she could not. His will was greater than any command. When dawn came, the battlefield roared to life. The enemy army stretched across the plain, a sea of steel and fire. Their banners rose high, their voices thundered. They believed the palace would fall. They believed the empire was already dead. But on the walls of the palace, the soldiers of the queen stood shoulder to shoulder, their hearts trembling, yet their eyes fixed on one figure. The human walked to the front, limping, blood seeping through his bandages, yet his head was high, his step steady, his presence louder than the enemy's drums. The soldiers began to shout, first a few, then all, Protector! Protector! The name shook the air. It rolled across the battlefield, striking the enemy with confusion. For how could one human inspire such fire? The queen stepped beside him, raising her blade high. Her voice thundered, we are not broken. We are not weak. We will not flee, not while he stands, not while I stand with him. The soldiers roared, the enemy charged. The ground shook as steel clashed with steel. The human was the first into the fray. His body screamed with pain, but his fists and blades struck with fury. He fought not as a knight, not as a soldier, but as a man who refused to fall. His blood mixed with theirs. His voice roared louder than the battle itself. The queen fought beside him, her blade carving through enemies with grace and fire. She had always been a ruler from the throne, but now she was a warrior in the mud. Her movements mirrored his, her strikes flowed in rhythm with his. Together they became more than queen and protector. They became one storm. The enemy pressed hard, their numbers endless, their fury relentless. The human staggered more than once, his vision blurred. Yet each time he began to fall, the queen was there, her hand on his arm, her blade covering his side. And when she faltered, he stepped forward, shielding her with his body. The soldiers saw it. They saw their queen and the human fighting as one. They saw courage that did not bend, and their fear turned into fire. They surged forward with new strength. Their voices rose as one, echoing across the battlefield. The enemy wavered. Their confidence shook. How could they break a line that refused to break? How could they crush a spirit that refused to die? Hours passed like lifetimes. The battlefield was drowned in smoke and fire. The human's body was near collapse, his legs heavy, his chest torn. Yet his eyes still burned. Each strike he delivered was slower, but it landed with the weight of legend. At last the enemy commander pushed forward, a towering figure clad in black steel. His weapon larger than the human himself, he sneered. "You are only flesh, you cannot stop me." The human lifted his head, blood dripping from his mouth. His voice came broken, but unshaken. "Then break me, if you can," the commander struck. The blow crashed against the human's arm, snapping bone. He fell to one knee. The queen cried out, rushing forward, her blade clashing with the commander's. Sparks flew as steel screamed. But the human was not done. With his last strength, he rose again. His broken arm hung useless, yet he seized the commander's weapon with the other. Forcing it aside, his roar shook the battlefield, and with one final strike, the queen drove her blade through the enemy's chest. Silence fell. The enemy froze. Their commander collapsed in the mud. The tide broke. The enemy fled, their banners falling into the fire. The battlefield was won. The queen stood breathing hard, her sword dripping. She turned to the human. His body swayed, his face pale. He looked at her with weary eyes. A faint smile touched his lips. "We stood," he whispered. Then his knees gave out, and he collapsed into her arms. The queen held him tight, her tears falling freely. She raised her head, her voice thundering to the heavens. "Where my guards fled, he stood.